someone shared with me, like, this is an open conversation space. It's a courageous space. What do you mean by that? So what I mean by open conversation space is when we have conversation about inclusion, or when we have conversation about topics where each one of us has an opportunity to share their worldview and their history, it's quite tempting to go in polarization and try to find what's right and what's wrong and what's been done and what needs to be admitted and acknowledged and recognized. And therefore, it can also feel like it's not necessarily a safe space and the conversation is not necessarily open. I think it's important, and I believe it's important, that whatever the conversation we're having, whether it's a conversation with ourselves, our inner dialogue, or conversation with our spouse, friends, or work colleagues, or anywhere, we try to make it as open as possible, which doesn't mean that everybody needs to speak and then we need to vote about what's been going on, but to create an environment which is safe enough for each one of us to be able to voice our perspective with respect to the listener, and as well as respect to the ideas we didn't know we had, or the ideas that we sometimes apply a little bit of censorship, so that in our own expression, we can have a little bit more courage in sharing things with vulnerability. And by vulnerability, I mean being open to our own ideas as we face the difficulty to articulate them, so that they can be appreciated, received, and to some extent criticized or misunderstood, or that they have a life of their own and also appreciated and recognized and acknowledged and dissected and cut in pieces to some extent, so that people can decide what to do with them for their own sake. That's an open conversation. The biggest open conversation we can explore is, of course, happening in the sky, right, with the stars. The other one is what you see when you explore the rainforest or animal in the wild. The conversation is completely open. There is no right, there is no wrong. There is just an ecosystem manifesting and creating itself at all times. And for some reason, when we are working together, and for many good reasons, when we are together as humans, we have learned to operate within structures, within concepts, which initially are here to support us, but ultimately, and in many ways, are also preventing us from expressing ideas and expressing our potential or possibilities in what we are. So that might be a bit philosophical, and yet I believe it's also at the heart of inclusion, at the heart of courage, at the heart of heart-to-heart exchange. Finding the open space within ourselves is, and finding the open space or the open conversation, reconnecting with the open space and the open conversation within ourselves is clearly the bridge and the open arm that we hope to extend to the people we are in conversation with, especially when our worldview and our trajectory and the stories we experienced ourselves or through our ancestors are not that comfortable to be with in the flesh, but also within the constraint of, or within the larger context or the larger landscape of the story and the history we share. That's what I mean by open conversation.